Hey everybody, for those of you who have not met me, I am Alexander Lidgren, the CEO of Cleantech Invest, but most people call me Bigge. So happy if you do so as well. Really glad to see so many of you here. We have had more and more people each year since I started as the CEO, and well, running a stock listed firm is almost a bit weird. We think about you a lot, if you didn't know it. Our shareholders are actually on our minds a lot during the year. But as you can imagine, we don't get to see you that often. So it's really, really good that so many of you made it here. It's on, Joshua. So great to see you. If you haven't seen this yet, take a look at this. This is actually our purpose, to improve ecosystems through companies that solve global challenges. It is what gets us up in the morning, so it's really good if you have a look at it. We are fortunate enough to have companies that, if we make sure that they are a commercial success, we are actually achieving this. So it's a luxury in that sense. And then, of course, we believe that shareholder value tends to follow if our companies do well. I will go through a couple of things. Since so many of you made it here, I'll try to give you a bit of an insight into how we're thinking, a bit about what's happened over the year. I'll tell you a little bit more about two companies that you may not have heard of. We made one new investment last year, and we made one follow-on investment in a company that actually increased our ownership quite a bit. So I'll tell you a little bit more about those two. And then I'll try to tell you a bit about what we'll focus on the coming year. And I'll give you something that nobody has ever seen before. We have actually started to measure the impact of all our companies. So what we started with this year is 6 of them. We did the carbon impact. So how are they actually influencing the carbon emissions of the world? Now that they have revenues that they're actually having a significant impact. And we did the water impact. So how much fresh water are they saving? We did that for 2 of our companies. So we are starting that this year. You'll be the first to see this. Well, main events. This is an obvious slide to show. We had a 4th year of revenue growth that was very good. And this, it needs to be mentioned that this is not including the big no-cart order that they won in 2017, of course. This is without that one. So it's still a really good growth year. And, well, since our share price has, of course, increased quite a bit over the last 2-3 years, this is also worth looking at. This is when the first annual general meeting, actually, that I was present at. That was in 2014, and we were, of course, quite happy then. Our revenues of our portfolio had grown by 83%, and things were actually taking off. But if you compare that year to the year we are in now, we now have 2 companies that have crossed the 10 million euro mark in revenue this year. In 2014, our entire portfolio did not even have revenues of 5 million euro. So it's been quite the revenue growth, and we do not see any signs of this slowing down, I should also say. I'll go through some of the companies that have had some major developments this year. These are not the only ones, but for time reasons I can't go through all 15, so I'll take the ones where we have quite a big ownership and where significant things have happened. Energize, CEO Sami is here, he'll be happy I'm talking about them. Company that has really had a breakthrough this year in many aspects. Well, as you can see, 5 installation orders over the year, and I take the liberty of also mentioning things that have happened in the last quarter. So this is actually including the last quarter. First revenue sharing payment was achieved from China. For those of you who don't know Energize, they do savings in compressed air systems. So they put sensors in place, and then they're able to measure compressed air systems and manage them more efficiently. They typically save 20 to 30% of the electricity use when producing compressed air. Compressed air is something like 5% of global electricity consumption, so this is a huge market. Mainly, Energize has been focusing on China. And of course, one big thing is to get paid, because they do this as a revenue sharing. So only when the customers get the saving, Energize gets paid. So they got their first major payment from a revenue sharing project actually the last year. It's a big milestone as well. They closed the pre-IPO and attracted also some strategic investors. You may have heard of Scania, the truck manufacturer. They are now a part owner of Energize. And Durr, Heinz Durr, who is the main owner of a Frankfurt stock-listed company, is one of the largest suppliers to the manufacturing industry, a German company. And it's also a result of, you may have heard of our pop-up offices. that we have actually located ourselves for some time in different places in the world. I was in Germany, in Berlin, and this is a result of that time. I met the founder of this company, and we talked about Energize a lot, and then he got to meet the whole team who came over there. They have now been to visit their factory, and then they invested in the firm. And to succeed in Germany, it's actually important to have some German interest in the company, so they can explain the market, open some doors. So this is also an example how that has been good for us, I think, these pop-ups. Nuka, you may have heard about, Finnish company that does a system, or a software you should say, to measure energy, air quality and sustainability related data in big real estate. A lot of the energy, as you know, gets consumed in buildings. And there is actually quite a lot of data in a lot of buildings, but typically it does not get used because it tends to be in a format that is not so easy to access. You can go down into the cellar and plug into things and understand it, and maybe you can, but typically the real estate owners are still managing energy, air quality and sustainability related data quite bluntly. It's a huge market that we still see is waiting to be grabbed. Nuka is doing that. They have grown really well the last year. They now have 1,000 buildings connected to the system. Gotten their first customers in Benelux, and they are right now doing their project in China. Also something that we have helped initiate actually. It's a partner that started by investing a little bit into Cleantech Invest, big industrial firm, and now they are a partner for Nuka in doing a Chinese pilot. They're looking to US potentially next. They have also announced plans to list and close the pre-IPO round early this year. So for filtration, for those of you who don't know it, it's a filter that can clean very fine particles. So 1/100th of a hair is what they can clean in terms of particles. Typically that clogs up filters. So then you have to stop the process, take the filter out, replace it or clean it, and they can do it continuously. It's an ultrasound that cleans the filter and then a backflush that sends it out. Also a company that has really had a breakthrough this year. 11 projects in 2016, if I'm not wrong, Tarja. Double turnover. And just recently now in Q1, they got their first real volume order. For companies like Software Filtration, it's largely about starting to prove to customers that the product actually does what they are promising. They did that last year and even got some order from some of these pilot projects. But now it's of course about getting volume orders. So then I got the first order of 3 units from the customers, and that's a big milestone. Just opened the US office to be able to test water in the US. And we're looking forward to doing more in the US with them. Nuka, I can imagine most of you may have heard about if you have followed us for some time, because they have had just remarkable success over the last years. This is what they do, power management units, so that you can plug in different sources of renewable energy. The heart and brain of a renewable energy system, you can say. But more and more, of course, they are delivering complete turnkey systems. So they have integrated towards specific suppliers, and then they look at the specific conditions on site, and then they simply do a renewable-based power plant for the customer. I have one more slide about them. Well, it sort of speaks for itself, I would say. 12.4 million euro revenue, and actually 3.4 million euro in profit last year to Nuka, which is something we rarely see ever in a company that is growing this fast on new markets. They have also established themselves in several African countries. They now have offices, or not offices, but they have registered companies in the UK and Singapore. And to be able to have profit during such a growth journey is really remarkable. So it's gone really well for them. Recently signed a big order in Zambia that you may have heard of, $200 million. Combined solar, storage and diesel power plant that they are delivering there to a big sugar refinery, is one of the takers of the electricity. And we raised 5 million euro for them in 2016. Partly because of this order that you need to scale up the company, of course, even before something like that happens. So we are very happy about that as well. Swap.com, you may also have heard about. Our online consignment store, as it is called in the US. I call it typically second-hand online shop, but it's supposed to be called an online consignment store. So it is now, I think, 3 football fields outside of Chicago in the US where they are accepting items. So it works very straightforward. You can put all your items, second-hand clothes, etc., in a box. You send it into Swap. They sort it, take pictures, categorize it, price it, and puts it all up on swap.com. They now have more than 2 million items for sale. They passed that just recently. So more than 2 million second-hand items are for sale on swap.com. They also passed, I should explain this, annualized sales. So if we take, this is the number we are actually reporting for Swap. They have now passed $20 million in annualized sales. If you look at the monthly revenue and assume that that would go flat, then they would be over 20 million in annual revenue. They have passed that point. Also raised quite a bit of funding to it. Some 30 million in total, I think they raised in 2016 during a few funding rounds. The big one was 20 or 19 million at the end of the year. I want to talk about 2 companies that you may not have heard about so much. This is one of them, Eagle Filters. So this is a highly efficient filter that in several processes cleans the intake air to gas turbines. And what happens otherwise in this very large market, you may know that electricity from gas is a huge source of electricity in the world. Otherwise, there's a lot of fouling on these blades, these turbine blades, and that decreases the efficiency, the fuel efficiency, and the power output of the turbines. With these filters, you get better, you get simply more electricity out of the natural gas. It's up to 9%, I think, in increased power output. And you also don't have to stop the actual turbines. Otherwise, you may have to stop it a couple of times each year to clean it. And with these, you don't have to do that. So it's as you can imagine, these turbines are big, and it's a lot of money each time for the electricity companies. We increased our ownership from 10 to 28%, so quite a bit in this company. Actually, we have an option to increase it even further to, I think it's 40%, if I remember correctly, Timo, to 40%. And it's a good example of how we have done in several companies. We try to get these type of pre-valued options so that we can increase a bit our stake in the companies if they are doing well. It's something that the companies appreciate because they know us and they think hopefully that we are a good investor, otherwise they would not agree to it. And it saves some time in the fundraising process. And for us, of course, it gives some predictability in the value that we can increase our ownership. So this is something that we try to work with. And well, it was in the Q1 report, but you may not have read that yet. They just got approved by, I think it's called NGA. They just merged with it. So it's actually the largest user of gas turbines in the world. Just approved them for installation among their gas turbines. And they will now start implementing Eagle into their gas turbines. We'll report more, of course, as that turns into concrete orders. Rescue Club. Maybe some of you have even tried this one. So I used to run my first company ever was a cafe. It feels like in a different lifetime, but I have carried a lot of perfectly good food to the waste bin. And this is something that Rescue is trying to solve. Some 15%, I think, of the whole restaurant industry is basically waste. You overcook of the meals that you know are popular because you don't want to run out. So you typically end up with a few perfectly good meals almost every day as a restaurant owner, even though you, of course, try to optimize it. This is what Rescue does. It's an app that lets you buy leftover lunches at typically half the price. Restaurant owners can put them up really easy and make money off of things that they would otherwise just throw away. We invested in this one, I think it was maybe March 2016, something like that. And it's grown really well since. They've expanded to 5 new markets, and the company is actually profitable if we were to spin it off just as the Finnish operations as they are now. 150,000 meals have been rescued since they launched, and they just launched some 14 months ago. And their annual run rate is actually now 1.1 million euro in sold meals over the platform. This is something that we get a lot of these budgets each year. We get a lot of companies that project this type of growth, and it rarely happens. But this is just, of course, the scale of it is a little more than 1 year, so that also explains the steep curve. But still, this is actually their sales per month since the company was started. And this is the registered users and the active restaurants of the service. So also, I would say, astonishing growth. We invested somewhere here. Of course, there is plenty of growth still and plenty of challenges also in growing something like this internationally. We are aware of that, but I wanted to show the progress so far. Just a list of the main events that I have not mentioned yet, I think. We attracted quite a bit of funding, if you include this quarter, to Cleantech Invest. So this is actually how much money we raised to Cleantech Invest since the last annual general meeting. Some 4 million euro. Almost 50 million euro has been raised by our portfolio of companies the last year, which is also an astonishing amount of money, actually, that has gone into them. And, well, last year, when I stood here, I did say that one of the main risks remaining for our companies was actually attracting funding to keep growing and implementing their growth strategies. And we had a few companies where it was extremely crucial that they attracted that funding. At the end of last year and beginning of this year, we actually managed to close some of those funding rounds. We were responsible for quite a few of them. And it was, in a way, a risky period for some of them. And we may even have been a bit lucky to close all of them as we did. So there are, of course, still risk in these companies, and that never goes away. You never know if a market will simply keep going. But one of these big risks in terms of funding was actually decreased, at least, towards the end of last year. We have communicated more actively. If you follow us over social media or any platforms, you will see that we communicate really actively these days. It's a conscious effort, and it has paid off. It is so much easier for us to get meetings with investors, get in the door even with customers when they know us. And a lot more people know us nowadays. So it shortens the time to actually get FaceTime with the people we want to meet. Acceleration, well, this has been basically our focus, I would say, the whole year. We have worked really hard to grow our companies. It has meant sometimes putting new resources on board. We have, for example, recruited chairman of the boards. We have even added CEOs to some of our companies. So it's been an active year in terms of acceleration. Pop-up offices. Well, last you said we should maybe soon start calling at least some of them offices. But I mentioned a bit about the Berlin office that I ran. We actually have another German owner on one of our companies. It hasn't been announced which one it is yet, but we'll announce that. So that, I think it was a really good experience. I was there for 5 months. It's an educational thing to be there, but the main thing is, of course, the contacts and networks you can give the portfolio companies. Lassi has been in Los Angeles, and I think you should maybe say a few words yourself about it.
Yeah, well, I could add to this concept of the pop-up offices that maybe that I think the starting point was that technology is global, and we are lucky to have like several companies with really truly global potential in our portfolio. And one of the challenges for small Finnish companies, particularly, is that they don't have the resources that are required to have access to the highest quality contact networks abroad. And like Bigge said, that from Berlin we got Scania and we got Duer and big investors into a couple of our portfolio firms. And the same way I would say in LA that I have met the LA mayor, Eric Garcetti, twice. He's like a candidate for the president of the United States. And it is because Cleantech Invest has a very interesting portfolio. Without like bragging too much, we can have access to just about anybody because we have an interesting story to tell. And in LA particularly, it's like if you have a story to tell, it's easier to approach anybody than it's easier to meet with the mayor of LA than the manager of a pulp mill in Finland, but you need to have something interesting to tell, and we are discussing establishment of 3 of our portfolio companies in the US and at the moment, and we'll see if something comes out of those, but we have gotten shareholders to the Cleantech Invest share from the US. We now have a proposal candidate for the board, very interesting person and a connection that totally brings new angle to our resource base. So I'd maybe finish by saying that our ambition level for the company and for the value of the company is in totally different levels where we are now. And to achieve that, we will have to go global, as we have started to do. And this is a good tool for that.
It really is. Thank you. Yeah, it really is. And we have, of course, we have always been going a lot to these hotspots. I mean, we already, as I mentioned, we have a Chinese industrial firm that owns a little bit of, and that's a result of us going, of course, to China. But to get long-term relations, you really need to be there for a while, we noticed. It is tricky to go back and forth and actually get big deals going, especially if you want to build trust and get big investors to part with their money. You actually have to be there for a while. So that's the reason why we stayed there for a couple of months in these places. I'll let you in for the next slide, but this is our portfolio companies today, and I just want to make one point in relation to this. 15 companies, and well, we often get told that one of the things that happens along the way for a company like us, we invest early in companies. Sometimes it's just an idea on a paper. So what happens is you get diluted. Your ownership goes down as the company needs to raise funding. Sometimes they're challenged, so they need to raise funding at challenging terms even. And of course, then our ownership will go down. And we hear this a lot. We even read it in the papers. And I think it's interesting to note this. This is our average ownership of our companies is now 14.3%. A year ago, it was approximately 13%. So we've actually been able to remain, basically keep our ownership even in companies that have been going really well. We've been doing it through quite innovative methods, I would say. We have been responsible for raising funding, and we have gotten some ownership for basically doing the legwork. Sometimes we've been using these pre-valued options, but we've actually been able to keep our ownership and even increase it in some firms. Part reason, of course, is that we've raised some more money to be able to invest, but we've also done some of it with legwork. And it's a big part, I think, of when there's big exits, even small changes in ownership will make a big difference. So it's an important role we have to keep our ownerships. Okay, well, I promised I'll give you this first calculation of our impact, but this is a good slide to actually show a little bit the motivation for doing it at all and how we actually are driven by this purpose. So this is if you save a kilowatt hour in China, somewhere in the EU on average, and this is actually in Sweden, and it's a kilowatt hour of electricity. We have basically hydro, wind and nuclear in Sweden, so it's a very low on CO2 electricity system. And in the relation of Energize focusing on China, this is of course where they save electricity. And it's the same for a lot of our companies. They tend to go where the need for their product is the largest, and that tends to be also where the emission effect is the biggest. So we have now tried to calculate the real impact that our companies are having. So we have looked at if you install something that they are doing to save energy in an industry, and you compare that to the status quo. So you compare that to simple operations running for a year as normal. Or you install, for example, an Eagle filter and get more electricity out of the same units of natural gas. How much carbon is actually saved? Swap, for example, that is in the second-hand industry, how much carbon is saved from using an item another round before it gets discarded on the landfill? And this is, to be honest, quite challenging to see what you are comparing to. But we have done it now for 6 firms. They were the ones that partly had the revenues to make it worthwhile to do it. I actually took some of the more revenue-generating firms. And then they also needed to have the time to supply us with all the numbers. So we have started with 6 companies. Swap and Eagle I mentioned because their impact was by far the largest in terms of CO2 emissions decreased. And then we did water. So how much fresh water was saved? Sophie Filtration, for example, then they enable water to be recirculated. So if you can clean the water and recirculate it in an application where you otherwise would typically bring in fresh water all the time, which is the case, for example, in the energy industry often. If you can recirculate it, it's how much fresh water are you saving? And then the same, of course, for Swap. How much fresh water is saved by doing another round of clothes instead of buying a new item. And this is the result. It does not say much probably to anyone, so I did some comparisons. This is what it compares to. So if you could actually take 107,000 Finnish cars off the roads. It's the equivalent of that, just by looking at the revenues of these 6 firms and the effect they are having. 17,000 Swedish households energy use. So not individuals, but households. It's like 2-3 people per each household on average. And I calculated the CO2 decrease per euro of sales, which I thought was interesting. Water, I love this one, so I put that. It's almost 4,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of fresh water that are saved. And it says something about the scale of water use in industry, actually, if you compare to household use of it. It's a lot that is used in the industry. 6,400 EU households of water use. And I got some interesting numbers that I thought was just fun to see myself. For example, Eagle filters last year saved as much energy as the entire city of Kotka's households use in their homes. They are from Kotka, Eagle filters. So they are actually having a carbon impact that is the equivalent of all the households' home energy use in their home city, which is quite astonishing, I think. We will do quite a bit of PR around this. We have not started yet, so this is a sneak peek. But we think this is really important as a way to almost challenge some of the current industry players, who are often showing that they are decreasing a little bit the emissions compared to how they were doing last year. But typically, of course, the emissions that they are generating are still huge. So we'll do quite a bit around it. Last point is our focus in 2017. Might be interesting for you to hear what we will be up to and are already up to. Exit preparations. It may sound more precise than it actually is. Largely that is also, of course, about getting the companies to a stage where we can potentially exit at good terms, or at least partially exit some firms. So this is something that we have been focusing on, but we will do it even more the coming year. This includes listing. We have already announced listing plans for 2 of our firms. And there I think it's important to say that we do not see those listings as the departure point for us in these firms. We will actually keep staying really active in both those that we have announced. Listing on First North, as we are, it's a good arena to grow the market value of your company if you do well. But you need to both, of course, do well, but you also need to be able to communicate it well. You need to have a shareholder following. So there's a lot that still needs to be done after a listing of a company like this, and we are well aware of it. Acceleration, including, well, I cannot overestimate the need for, just as Lasse said, internationalization. Our companies, of course, from the outset, typically have international markets in sight, but after a while it becomes even more evident the resources that you typically need to have to make it happen. Anything we can do here to help out along the way tends to make a big difference. So we've been in Berlin last year, already in LA, and we are looking potentially at Shanghai, China, for a pop-up office. Yes, Lasse, please.
Yeah. I have a question, or maybe...
You have a question for me?
Prepared.
Yeah.
Having to do with your previous point, I would like to mention it that going to this, when Bigge talked about his exit preparation, because he gets asked and I get asked and everybody gets asked that, okay, when do you make an exit? And yes, it is a milestone to make a good exit and realize profits. But we have had already for a longer time possibility to take exit of a few of our firms, but we have selected not to. And one consideration is that when you look at our growth numbers of 150%, you have to do the math that, okay, if we are exiting, do we have some better use for the money than to keep it where it is at the moment? And I would say that, the reason why we haven't exited some of the firms is that they keep growing so much that we can't think of anything better investment targets for those monies. But having said that, I mean, time is approaching for some kind of an exit.
No, but that's a good point, of course.
Yeah.
If we see explosive growth still to happen, of course.
Yeah, but point is that it's often asked, why don't you make an exit? You need to make an exit. But But yeah, the consideration is that you need to have better use for the money.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Communication, well, you've seen quite a bit of it, but the guy filming here, Joshua, he has been, we have been hiring him more and more for ourselves and for our portfolio companies as well, and we will actually bring him in full time starting in May. He's probably already more than full time occupied by us, but we're really happy about that. It's made a big difference actually to our communications. So you'll see more. Digital, physical, and unexpected. I think all these things are important. We are really active in all these social media, and it's in a way a cost-effective way to reach a lot of people, but it's not the only way. You sometimes just need to meet people in person. So we will be doing more even physical events. Unexpected is an important one because this communication landscape is changing extremely rapidly. The way to reach people, the way to get them excited, the way to get them to listen to you is changing by the week. So we need to actually try some things that are a little bit unexpected and sometimes a little bit out of the ordinary, and we will try to do so. Yeah, those were the 3 points. This is our goal for this year. End of this year will be the leading Cleantech accelerator in Europe. I think we are well on the way of reaching it. So I'm really happy about that. I don't have any more points. I only have this slide of the board member, Lassie, but I don't know if I should throw it on now or we wait with that. It's some point in between, maybe.
Sorry.
There's a few points. Okay, good. Then I'll just keep it.
In the background.
Yeah.
Keep it in the background.
I'll keep it in the background.
Could we have the impact?
Of course.
Background. I really like it.
That one.
That's good.
Yeah. We'll keep that one for now. Okay, well.
Feel free to tweet that out and to share this information. Give this everybody. It's pretty good stuff.
Well, great. Thank you very much.